All right. So if I have this, I'll make this simple for right now. If I have the square root of x equal 4, I'm trying to solve for x. Now this is a radical equation. This here was what kind of equation? These were quadratic equations. This is called a radical equation. It's not quadratic because you don't see it at x squared. You see a square root. That's radical. You can guess the answer, you can guess the solution to this equation right here. The square root of what number is 4? 6. The square root of 2 is not 4. The square root of 16 is 4. So your solution would be x equal what? 16. X equals 16 is your solution. So now it's not going to be that simple, but you need that simple idea to get to what you really need to know. But let's do this algebraically now. We guess at the answer, at the solution. So let's do this algebraically. I'm trying to get x by itself. Right now I'm taking the square root of x. What's the opposite of taking a square root? Square it. If this was cube root, now remember in here we're only dealing with square roots, but if this were a cube root, what's the opposite of taking the cube root? Cubing it, raising it to the third power. So if I'm taking the square root of both sides, I'm sorry, if I'm solving this radical equation, I want to get x by itself, I'm going to square both sides. What you do one side, you do the other. Just like when we did the square root of both sides, what did you one side, you do the other. But don't confuse that with the other one, though. The other one, we took the square root, we had to do that plus or minus. Because we knew that we had to have how many solutions? 2. So in order to get the 2 solutions, I had to do that plus or minus. Here, the square root of what number is 4? 16. Is that the only one? Square root of negative 16 is not 4. Square root of negative 16 is 4i. That's the only one. So don't do that plus or minus, because there's only one solution. What is it? 16. So all you do is just square both sides. That's all you do. Now remember, when we did this right here, we said this. We said the square and the square root do what? Undo each other. They cancel each other out. So you're left with that base, x plus 5. Same thing here. The square and the square root do what? Undo each other. So what's left? X. And what's 4 times 4? 16. Okay? So let's talk about the one that's on your test now. Let's suppose we had this. The square root of x minus 3 equal 6. X minus 3 equals 6. Let's do this algebraic. You have to show the work. So I got to get rid of that square root. Well, first of all, let me make this point. The square root has to be by itself on one side. So is it by itself? No, is the square root expression by itself?
Yes.
Yes. Okay? In other words, compare that to this. Is the square root expression by itself? No, because you have what else on that side? The 7. Okay. So before you square both sides, you got to get the square root by itself. So here, what we have to do first? Subtract 7. Okay. And so you get the square root of x minus 3 equal. I did not mean this. I'm sorry. I did not mean this to be negative. Let's make that 9 right here. So it'll be what? 2? Okay. All right. Once you get the square root by itself, then you undo the square root. So how would you undo the square root? You'd have to do what to both sides? Square both sides. So you can do something like this. Square, square. These undo each other. So what's left on the left? Equal what? And so notice I went from a square root equation to what kind of equation? Linear. So how to get x by itself? Add 3. So what's your answer? 39. And you don't have time, but if you did, you can always check this. So I'm saying that my solution is 39, right? So let's go back to the original problem. What's 39 minus 3? What's the square root of 36? 6. Okay. All right, let's look at this one. The square root of 2x minus 1 minus 4 equal a negative 2. The square root of 2x minus 1 minus 4 equal a negative 2. What's the first step you got to do before you square both sides? Add 4 to both sides. And so I get the square root of 2x minus 1, this is 0, equal 2. All right, so that's where I'm at. So I got to get rid of that. I have to get rid of that square root symbol. So what do I raise both sides to? Second power. So I'm going to do this now. Raise both sides to the second power. The square and the square root undo each other. So what do I get on the left? Equal 4. So I went from a radical equation to what kind of equation? Linear. So what's the next step? So I get 2x equal 5. So what's your solution? 5 halves, or 2.5, right? Okay, so there's your solution. And you can check it. What's 2 times 5 halves? Not 10. What's 2 times 5 halves? 10 halves, which is what? 5. 2 times 5 halves is 5. What's 5 minus 1? 4. What's the square root of 4? What's 2 minus 4? Negative 2. And that's what you wanted. Okay? So you can always check these radical equations easily. What? All right. So let's see. Okay, so this, oops, wrong one. Okay, so I'm going to give you this one. Now it's not due, but let's, when I give it to you, let's go ahead and do number 6 when I give this to you. Nope. I think I always get the test guy.
It's wrong. Did it again. Hello.
I didn't think it felt
So
like
I'm not counting. It just turns out there's something wrong.
I think you really is. I think I'm about to move up there by Jordan because Stephanie doesn't get a pay rise.
We'll always do one over here with Selma.
Not if I'm up there, 'cause I'm gonna think you pay for the 40 back there too.
I know where you live.
All right. So let's look at
6.
number 6. So what's the first thing we do number 6?
Add 8 to both
Add 8 to both sides. And so I get the square root of 4 minus 3x equal 3, right? Okay, what's the next step? Now I got the square root by itself, so what's the next step? Square both sides. The square and the square root undo each other, so I get 4 minus 3x equal 9. So notice I have this linear equation now. What's the next step? Subtract 4. So I get negative 3x equal 5. So what's x?
Negative 5/3.
Yep, I get negative 5/3. Okay, so there's your solution. All right, let's check it. Go back to the original. So we're checking this here. Okay, so So where we see the x, you're going to plug in negative 5/3. So we have the square root of 4 minus 3 times x. And what's x? Negative 5/3 minus 8. And you want to see that's going to equal a negative 5. Okay? Order of operation, you got to multiply first before you subtract. What's 3 times a negative 5/3? Which is negative 5. So what's 4 subtract a negative 5 though? 4 subtract negative 5. So that becomes 4 plus 5, which is what? Okay, guys, look. 4 subtract 3 times negative 5/3, right? Y'all agree the 3's divide out. So you get 4 minus a negative 5, which will give you 9. That's 4 plus 5, which is 9. So this becomes the square root of 9, and you want to see minus 8, and you want to see that's equal to negative 5. What's the square root of 9? Is 3 minus 8 equal to negative 5? Yes. So negative 5/3 is your solution. Okay, so that takes care of this one. So you do have one radical equation on your final. They always have one. So that takes care of this. Okay. All right. Now, one of the things you turned in, one of the worksheets you turned in was where you had to multiply square roots. Okay, so